Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Best Practices Session 5. This is the last session of season 2022. It has been taking slightly longer than usual to finish and wrap up the season, but here we are. So for today's outline, it's some of the classical people showing main features of what has been happening and what is happening right now. So the outline for today will start with Jeff Franklin, who will be introducing or presenting information about the bud hardiness, plus what is happening, forecasting, and giving, as always, more than a couple of hints of the last season. After I will be continue talking about the growing season 2022, providing information about what happened about the main climatic weather data, relating with the main phenological stages, and talking of what happened through a couple of observations and what is happening in the future. So I will be preparing everything for our discussion with Jeff. We'll prepare everything for the discussion between Steve, Marcel, and Daniel Graham about what is happening right now, their main observations, their main challenges, and how they are preparing and working towards this next growing season on 2023. So with this, I would like to introduce Jeff Franklin. It's very well known between us, working at AFC and providing every week or almost every week through the growing season information about the weather, and now through the winter, the bud hardiness reports. So Jeff, please.
Thank you. Just let me get my screen set up here. Okay. Perfect. So let me know. Sing out if you can't see that. Again, I took this picture just yesterday. That's our research vineyard. Snow has been a new addition there. Has not been typical of this year, but I think we're going to get to see a little bit more of it, and I'll explain that as I move along here. There we go. Okay, so this graph is a familiar graph I show virtually every time we get together and talk weather. So the black dots are the average daily temperatures that we've observed really for the whole calendar year this year of 2022, from 1st of January to the 31st of December. And the gray trend line shows what we would expect in terms of temperatures for that day. So one thing characteristic of this growing season is the entire growing season was above average. There was very few times when we were in cool spells. We started off cool a little bit early, but that didn't hold, and it's just continued to amplify and become more pronounced. Well, one thing that hasn't happened as much this year, although we may see it again, is normally by the time we get to the end of into December and into January, we see far more variability. In other words, those black dots at the right end of that plot should be much more. There should be much more separation there, and that hasn't happened largely because of a consistent above average trend. It's been very strange weather for the winter of 2022 and 23. So again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much. Some of this is data that Francisco wants to talk about, but I think it's important to recognize here. So these are the mean monthly temperatures from all through the growing season and right into the first 21 days of January of 2023. And so I show the mean temperature compared to the 25-year average and the difference. And if you see every single one of those differences in that right-hand column are either 0 when there was no difference, or a positive value, meaning that we were above average. And it's even more interesting that when we get down to the bottom, November, December, January, those differences are huge. Now, they don't impact the growing season as much, but they do impact physiological processes. I mean, we need the vines to go through a period of chilling so that the buds are ready to break next year. Now, I have no fear that this won't happen. We're still in that range, but there's a lot of physiology that goes on November, December, January, and February. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more when I get into bud hardiness. But you can see there, the 4 months that I've got highlighted here, circled, 2 to 3 degrees, 4 degrees higher than average, which is a huge discrepancy when you're looking at mean daily temperatures. Growing degree days, again, I'm only going to very briefly touch on this because Francisco's going to talk about it, but I want to draw, I mean, if you have above average temperatures, then you're obviously going to be above average in terms of growing degree days or heat units. And we were good all through the year. And even though we remained above average in September and early October, it did start to fall apart there a little bit in September at a time when we were really counting on things being more consistent. We had our first, as we recorded here, our first frost event or potential frost event, temperature below 0 degrees in early October. Although it didn't have much of an impact, we didn't lose, for the most part, we didn't lose leaves, but there was some variability in there. And I guess it would have been nice to have had what we saw in July and August carry on through the fall. Would have been the perfect year, if that even exists from a meteorological point of view. But I will pause here for a minute. So I don't often show this plot, but I think it's interesting and it may help frame the conversation when we talk about how we manage disease this year. So these are precipitation events measured in millimeters. I think the range here is about 0 to 40 millimeters of rain. So these would be daily accumulations of precipitation. You can spend a lot of time looking at this, and that's not really my intention here, but one thing I think is interesting in this is that we had very few times where we were without precipitation through this growing season. And if you remember, we started in terms of cumulative precipitation, I think Francisco's going to talk about that. We started off with very high values in 2022. And that moisture that was in the ground that kept things going very well right through the planting season and well into June and early July. And you can see there's a little point there, right, maybe around the middle of July where we had minimal rain, less than 5 millimeter events, and that was for the better part of a month. And so from a planting perspective, it became a little tricky. The ground was dry. But as you can see, we still had rain events in there. So from a disease control perspective, I don't think there was a time of the year when we were out of the woods from trying to control disease. There was always some event that we were trying to prepare for, and they were consistent through the year. Some of these events were quite large. And if you remember, although it doesn't look very big on this plot, Hurricane Fiona, this 24th of September, as a rain event, we had 2 days there in excess of 25 millimeters. But again, 50 millimeters, what we would have called historically a 2-inch event, is not that dramatic. We would normally get that in the fall anyway. But anyway, a fairly wide distribution and fairly consistent rainfall throughout the growing season. I'll draw on soil temperatures here. I know Francisco doesn't have any information that he's going to present on this. Again, so the thick red line is the soil temp at roughly 35 centimeters as we measured here at the Kempfel Research Station through the season. And we've been above average for most of the season. We dropped a little bit below middle of September and early October, but we've continued on. And by the time we get into November, where we had very high temperatures, much above average, and still some sunny days, of course, that temperature was experienced at 30 centimeters, 35 centimeters was quite high, well above average, almost extreme. When you think about the buffering capacity of soil, you would not expect to see the type of spikes that we see, late October, early November. And it's kind of left us at a point where currently we are essentially almost the end of January. No frost in the ground, and although the plot I show here is a 35 centimeter depth, at 5 centimeters we're still running about 1.5 degrees, which is high for this time of year, and it's of course indicative of the fact that we have essentially no frost. So let's talk about bud hardiness. Really, I've showed you all those previous plots to set up what we're going to talk about here in terms of bud hardiness. So the plot that's on the screen is bud hardiness from last year. So it's all of 2021 and 2022. So the winter of exactly 1 year ago. And I show you this to show you how a normal bud hardiness season should go. I expect some of you have seen this plot before. This is the one that we put on the biweekly report that we put on the CGCN website. But essentially, the dark black line is the minimum temperatures that we're observing here in Kempfel. And the colored lines, the green, the red, the yellow, the gold, and the blue, are the 5 varieties that we follow through our biweekly bud hardiness survey. And those points on those lines represent what we call the LTE 50, or the temperature that we predict would kill 50% of the buds. And we actually determine that through a fairly long process. We grab samples in the field, we bring them back, we trim off the buds, we freeze those buds, we see what the freezing point is, collate the data, so on and so forth. And what you see here is the collation of a whole year's worth of bud hardiness data. And the temperature scale on the left, on the x-axis or the y-axis, is just degrees Celsius, the actual freezing point of the buds. And we use that as a proxy for how hardy the buds are. And you can see a couple things here. And I think you kind of have to understand that if you're going to understand what's going on this year. So we start in September or October or early November, what we call the early bud hardiness. And it comes about from starch in the canes that's been put there through photosynthesis through the season. The leaves are making sugars that it's stored as starch. Some of those starches get broken down back into sugar, so the sugar levels in the cane goes up. And sugar acts as a pretty decent antifreeze. A lot of plant tissues use this. And so we get this what we call early bud hardiness. It gives us hardiness down to around -20, -22 in that range, just brought about by the residual sugar left over in the tissues. And that's good. I mean, that gives us a fair degree of protection. But as you can see, beyond this, when we get into January and February, the hardiness dips even lower. And that's a secondary process. And that secondary process needs cold weather to happen. We call that late bud hardiness. And this is where the varieties really start to separate out. You can see I'll translate the legend for you. So the green, the red, and the yellow lines are three vinifera varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Riesling. They all cluster quite close together in the depths of winter. The other two varieties in the survey are Lac du Blanc and Marquette, and they're hybrids. They're actually bred to be more cold tolerant, and you can see they separate out and they go quite lower. And for the most part, Marquette, which we use as a proxy for anything under that Minnesota program, it could be Frontenac, other varieties such as that, they're hardy down to below -30. But that only comes when we get that secondary hardness, and cold weather is the trigger for that. So you probably know where this is all heading. So this is this year's bud hardiness survey up to our last survey date, which was January 18th. And what's striking about this is that we've definitely got the early season hardiness that has happened, but in the absence of cold weather, we've not gotten that late season response. And I don't want to make people panic, but I mean, we need this to happen. We want to see these varieties get the maximum protection for winter, because if you remember from last winter, we did get a one weather event in January that went down into the -20s. So we need all the protection we can get in terms of buds in Nova Scotia. And right now the response is flat. In fact, if I look at Marquette, the one hybrid variety in our survey, or the one Minnesota hybrid in our survey, it's starting to deacclimate a little bit. I don't think that this is to be sustained. I think some cold weather will actually bring that back down, but it's certainly a fair distance from the -31 and -32 that we should see in hardiness of Marquette at this time of year. So putting this in a chart, looking at the LTE 50 values, and that's the value that we put on those plots. And that middle column, the mean LTE 50 value. So that's the average value that we have that we've seen from our surveys in the previous 5 years at this time of year. Because remember that if you remember those lines, they kind of curve down in kind of a U shape or a smile shape. So right now on January 18th, I picked all the values up from the previous surveys to see where we should be. And of course, the right-hand column there shows the difference. So in every case, this year we are less hardy than we should be based on other previous years of the survey. So the difference for the three vinifera varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Riesling, is 1 to 2 degrees, 1 to 1.5 degrees. Not too bad. I suspect we'll make that up. The one that we're not so sure about is of course, the value for hybrids. They're running, almost 4 degrees off what we should see at this time of year. Again, needing that cold weather to take them through that second stage of bud hardiness. So where is winter 2023 headed? Or is there going to be a winter 2023? up to probably 2 weeks ago, I would have said there's some possibility that we would never get winter conditions here, but that has changed. Forecasts and some events are setting up on the West Coast that's going to change things. So I think winter will finally begin. And I say my prediction from looking at the predictions of professional meteorologists. We have a polar vortex conditions setting up or developing in BC, and it's probably going to just move east across the country through early February. Although it's going to move east, there are some predictions, and not everybody calls it the same way because there's some time before this happens. Most meteorologists are saying that this will likely peter out before it reaches Atlantic Canada and Quebec. But even with that, temperatures are expected to begin to drop to first to seasonal and then below seasonal starting in early February. And we're going to go through a short period of time. It doesn't look like it's all the current forecasts, which are all long-term right now, which makes them subject to error. It looks like our lowest temperatures that we're going to realize here in the valley will probably be around -15 degrees. So that's not so bad. That's not a very strong polar vortex from our perspective. It's a far cry from the -20s and 30s that they're definitely going to see out west. But we are going to be impacted by it. But I've taken this, so the chart there is our LTE 10, 50, and 90 values from our most recent January 18th survey. And our LTE 10 is that temperature where we expect to see about 10% bud death. It's kind of the early, the point where you would see enough damage that would be noticeable by the time it got to the growing season. And if you scan down that column, even though we're not as hardy as we should be, we're still into the -20s in terms of hardiness, LTE 10, for every variety in our survey. So I think this is okay, and it still leaves us a margin of safety between those predicted LTE 10s and where they predict the temperatures are going to go on the low side as this polar vortex sweeps through. There's no indication whether or not this is the last time this is going to happen this year. There could be others. I mean, we are just entering February. February is a pretty wintry month for us. But one thing meteorologists are looking at for the eastern part of the country is that even if the polar vortex peters out and we don't see the deep minimums that other places are going to see, probably going to see a lot of snow. A lot of precipitation still around, and we're on the storm track. And with this cold temperature, we're probably going to see some accumulating snow in Nova Scotia. And my last slide here, looking at the seasonal forecast for January, February, and March 2023. This gets put out every month by Environment and Climate Change Canada at the first of the month. So you can see where we are. Nova Scotia is on the right-hand side of that map, the orangey red colors, which is an indication of 70–80% of above average temperatures for Nova Scotia. And of course, we've already realized that in January, but that forecast, as it was measured on the predicted on the 1st of January, said that that's going to continue through the 3 months, January, February, March. On February 1st, they'll make another seasonal forecast, will carry us through for February, March, and April. But I wouldn't be surprised if this weakens a bit, but we are still in the above, greater than 50-50 chance of having above average temperatures for the rest of the winter. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for such a good presentation and to be quite good on the time. So if somebody from the attendees has a question, please I invite you to write on the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. Okay, we have a couple of minutes for some questions. So Jeff, something that I'm curious that you already explained, but if you could repeat it would be great. So to start the bud hardiness, which is the role of starch or the reserves from last year?
So we start off anew every year. Every cane that we have was a bud in May. As those canes develop and sugars are made by the leaves, sugar stores poorly. So it gets converted to starch. And if you were to cut open a grape cane in August and early September, there would be a lot of starch, not very much sugar. Still carbohydrate, but a very compact form of carbohydrate. So we start off with starch. But what happens is as we get closer and as the leaves start to upsize and the day lengths start to shorten, is that starch gets converted back to sugar, because starch If you mix starch and water and stick it in the freezer, it doesn't have much of an effect, not much of an antifreeze effect. But if you take that same quantity of sugar, put it in the water, mix it up, put it in the freezer, it has quite a cryoprotecting effect. So what happens is starch gets converted to sugar. There's a lot of carbohydrates in the wood now stored as sugars, and that's what gives us that initial level of bud hardiness, that protection. Because when you grapes, and not all deciduous crops are like this, but grapes they will allow a small amount of freezing in tissues outside of the cell, but they can't allow any freezing inside the cell. So those sugars are protecting the liquids inside of the cells of the grape canes and the buds. And so that gets us to that first part, that -20 bump in bud hardiness. But to get the rest of the way, what the plant has to do is get rid of some of that water that is sitting in all those tissues. And that only happens as temperatures cool down. And we're seeing that that's been greatly delayed this year. And the only reason we can think of is that we haven't had the cool temperatures, because everything else should have been perfect. We have good carbohydrate levels in the tissue. We had an excellent season, lots of sunshine, lots of carbohydrates produced, no other reason for there to be a deficit. So we're just waiting on that cold weather to finish that process. And what we'd like to see is gradual cold weather, because it takes a bit of time for that moisture to be shed out of those buds to concentrate those sugars and give us that little extra bump of hardiness.
Great, thank you very much for the explanation, and to be redundant, because I will be repeating the same of how good was the season, so the plants, they have good reserves. So if nobody else has any questions, I would like to thank to Jeff. I would like to repeat what he already said. All the bud hardiness reports are on the CGCN website. Also, we are publishing on the Grape Blog, and they are stayed on the Perennia website. So if you want to pass through that or read one of the articles wrote last year by Harrison Wright and Jeff, please go ahead, take a look. It's worth it, because history helped us to take decisions and to see how it changed everything. And also it has a linkage with the pruning decisions and the production for the following season. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks also, Jeff. And with that, I'd like to welcome and introduce Francisco. Today, he is live from Dijon, France with us. So while we're doing a noontime session here, it is early evening for Francisco. So thanks very much for joining us and giving us your time, Francisco. So just remind everyone, if a question pops in your mind while Francisco is giving his presentation, put it in Q&A, and we'll try to answer it at the end of his presentation. And with that, go ahead, Francisco. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to talk about the growing season 2022. You will see that we will overlap a little bit with Jeff, but that it's fine. The idea is to show you from different perspectives and in different ways the information, and be prepared for the discussion at the end of the session between Danielle, Marcel, and Steve. So for today, my outline, it's like 3 main points. The first one is the climate conditions. We'll be talking about temperatures, precipitations, and frost-free days and growing degree days. So as already mentioned, Jeff will be overlapping a little bit there. I will continue with the grapevine conditions. We'll talk the phenological stages, the 3 main ones that I would really like, or I would like you to take notes, which are bud burst, bloom, and veraison. Also a little bit about the efficiencies, production for last year, and the pruning and beyond. Again, this is very tiny, a couple of things, hints, so I can prepare the discussion a little bit, the material for the guys. So here we go. Already showed by Jeff on a very nice graph, we'll see the temperatures and the mean degrees Celsius per month. As you can see, we have the last 6 years, because I have been in Nova Scotia since 2017. And we have the main growing season, April until November. And on the bottom, you will see the average, okay? So I want to bring your attention at the beginning with May. Again, Jeff already mentioned, May was quite warm. We had a mean as 12.3 degrees Celsius, the highest temperature in the last couple of years. and followed by 2017 and 18 with 11.8 and 11.7 respectively. So it shows that we have good conditions. It was quite warm, so that was helping to pop up the buds from winter. So I will show you the dates later. The other month that I wanted to bring your attention is July and August. 2022 was quite warm, but not the warmest. If you see, 2018 was warmer than 2022 in these 2 months with 22 and 21.5. Sadly, we had that frost at the beginning of June. Otherwise, the story could be completely different, quite warm, the mean temperatures. Also, September and October 2022, again, was quite warm, but I want to bring you backwards a little bit to 2017, and you can see September and October with 17.6 and 12.7. It was quite warm, and you can feel it in the wine. If you have some wines in your library and your cellar from 2017, I will invite you to do a tasting and compare with the next seasons, because that mean temperatures and the extension of the season really helps to have a better ripening, not only for sugar loading, also for the development of aromas. Lastly, I want you to bring to the bottom so you can see the average temperature. Again, 2022 was the warmest with 13.9 degrees, and followed by 2021 and 2017 with 13.7 degrees Celsius. Okay, it's important just to keep in mind that we are comparing all the 6 seasons, our average for following season, and it's coming, this information, again, thanks to Jeff from AFC in Campbell, so it can vary depending where is your weather station. Now we see precipitations, everything's in millimeters. You can see from 17 until 2022, from April until November. On the bottom, you will see the total per year, and on the right, the average from the last 20 years, okay? So first, we have a nice humidity already shown by Jeff on the graph. Throughout the year, we have a good precipitation, but I would like to bring your attention to May and July. May, it was with 38.3 millimeters. If you compare with the average is 83, and compare the other seasons, less water. However, that is not a big deal because we had enough humidity coming from April as well. The plants, they didn't have huge development, and the temperature was not warm enough, so it wouldn't produce a big damage. It was ideal for the development. On July was a different story, even though we had that 36 was not all the time or well distributed. It was a lot at the beginning on the month, which can impact bloom. And if you were, or your vineyard was in a light soil with lack of precipitation, that could create like some water stress for a couple of days until the next rains. So I want to highlight August and September. Again, in August of 2022, we had 120.7 millimeters, quite rainy. Again, if you remember, it's a couple of events. It's not well all the time well distributed. And if we compare with the previous seasons, 2018, we had 141 millimeters, okay? On which can be the impact? Well, the soil will have enough water and it can trigger more plant development. The plants will continue growing and also will increase the damage or the pressure of diseases. So that is what happened. Again, I'm talking only about precipitation. I haven't said anything about humidity, which also has an impact in fungal disease. And if you see September, again, we have a good amount of rain, even a little below than the average of the last 20 years, but not the ideal. Why? Because when we are reaching a veraison, we don't want to have too much rain on the soil profile. So the plants, they can stop or slow down the growth, and all the photosynthesis or all the sugar synthesis doesn't go to the plant to keep growing, goes to the fruit. So October, again, just to show that even though in some places harvest was almost done, it was still moving on. We have 73.2 millimeters, which is lower than the average. And again, I want to bring your attention to 2017, where we had only 42 millimeters, was lower. And that combined with the warm temperatures, it helped to the ripening. This year was quite good as well, the previous season. It's just want you to bring your attention. So when you are tasting wines, you're remembering a little bit about these tables and graphs showing this session. And again, about totals precipitation, the average was 783 millimeters in the last 20 years. And 2019 was the highest in the last couple of years with 1,000. And I want to bring again your attention on 2022 and 2017 that we have a 613.3 millimeters and 601.7 millimeters, okay? So just to show you that the variation of precipitation every year and how is the order in the last couple of years. Now let's pass for frost-free days and growing degree days. Again, this information will vary depending on the location, and the impact also will depend on the variation, on the variety, and in the topography. So overall, this season has been shorter than 2021. You can see the total days. The longest was 2021 with 196. And sadly, as everybody knows, 2018 was the shortest one. For 2022, the last frost on spring was on May 10, and the first frost at fall was on October 3. Again, these numbers, they can vary depending how is the topography and where you're locating. I remember from the beginning of October, end of September, already some damage in the canopy, but it can be by other factors as well. In terms of growing degree days, here you will see again from April until November and 17 until 22. And on the last column, you will see the average from 2012 until 2021. Again, let's start taking a look to May. May for 2022 was quite high, 105 growing degree days, compared with the average of 89. The next season following is 2017. So that it can help us to explain why we have an earlier bud burst compared to previous seasons, okay? Especially with 2019, many of you might remember that it was quite cold and it was very difficult to reach that point. July, I like to highlight July because it's the month where we finish bloom and also it's starting fruit set, and in some places, if it's an early variety, like Bac Noir or Frontenac, the berries, they will be like almost at pea size. So 2022, we had 638 growing degree days, which is a good amount. It's quite high, even bigger than the mean average, and quite similar to 2021. Also, the other month that is interesting to see, September, because again, it's the ripening month. Many varieties are in aspiration, or it's even harvest time for many varieties. And we have 1,168, which is higher than the mean, which is 1,000, almost 100. Okay, so we have some positive variation, and that impact in fruit ripening, how is the development and how the fruit is developed, creating flavors, aromas, and also sugar. But also it gives us information of when we have to start harvest, or at least maybe not the main information to start it, but at least an idea of when it can be happening. I like to show October because it's quite interesting to see that we have more than 1,200 growing degree days, which is almost 100 growing degree days higher than the mean. And you can see a slightly trend in the last 3 years to be increasing slowly and slowly. So just to sum up all the information that I show about weather and also complementary to Jeff, the mean degrees Celsius temperature in 2022 was 13.9 degrees, which is followed by 21 and 2017 with 13.7. The precipitations on 2022 had 613.3 millimeters, which is slightly higher than 2017 with 601. Again, if you remember the graph and you remember the season, we have a short period of time without a lot of rain and a good heat. So that can trigger a slightly water stress, but it's very punctual. And after with the following rains, that was recovered. In terms of frost-free days, we had last season 146 days, while on 2020, 120 days, and on 18, 113 days. Finally, growing degree days until October of 2022 was 1,244, followed by 2021 and 2020 with 1,222 and 1,189. So about phenological stages. And here I want to highlight, and I would like to encourage you, if you have the time to take and track what is happening in your vineyard, will be the best. For bud burst, average, and when I'm saying average, I'm taking hybrids and vinifera, it's May 17, while on 2021 was May 14, which you remember was quite warm as well, and on 2020 was on May 24. Again, this will vary depending on the variety and location. Meanwhile, for bloom, it started on June 21, and on 2021 was quite similar on June 20, and on 2020, June 24. Finally, variation is starting on August 14, and on 21, it was again the same day, and on 2020, on August 15. So in the photo, you can see how was it starting at the beginning, quite vigorous. You can see already the primary and the secondary buds developing. Bloom was quite nice. We had good. The only issue, as already mentioned in the presentation about weather, we have some precipitation with can shatter berries. So that's why you can see in some places your bunches with less berries. And finally, variation already starting there. So in terms of deficiencies and toxicity, I like to highlight this because it repeats many times, and it's good to keep an eye because nutrition will be crucial to be successful. So the good news, there were less deficiencies observed this year. However, we continue seeing zinc, boron, iron, potassium, and magnesium. So zinc and boron will be quite important, especially at the beginning of the season. Again, iron as well, because they will facilitate the elongation of shoots, but also to have a good pollination and good bunches, okay? However, attention, and this is especially for boron. Careful applying too much boron. I saw last season a couple of growers applying too much boron. It's not because they did it on purpose, it's because they didn't know. So if you're applying to your vineyard, keep an eye to don't over apply, otherwise you will see damage, you will have issues in leaf development, they will look like burn, and it will delay a little bit your process, okay? The same can happen with zinc, it's very tiny amount. In the case of iron, will help you to give a green color because it will trigger the synthesis of chlorophyll. It doesn't exist a lot of information about toxicity. Anyway, you have to apply the precise amount because you don't want to waste money and you don't want to contaminate the environment. In the case of potassium and magnesium, this is important. In the case of potassium, well, potassium and magnesium, they need a balance, but potassium will help you to gain more sugar and diminish acidity. And also the literature said that to provide more hardiness for the winter. Meanwhile, magnesium, it's one of the important molecules of chlorophyll, so it needs to be on the plant and will contribute to the greenish color, and both of them, they need to be in a balance. And in the case of magnesium, I want to remind you that exist some varieties in Minnesota, especially like Marquette or Frontenac, that they need a surplus of application because their uptake is greater. So keep an eye on those nutrients, and especially at the beginning of the season with zinc and boron. And the second half of the season, potassium and magnesium, plus potassium, potassium and magnesium, both need a balance. So here you can see a photo where we have like a boron deficiency. The internodes are quite short. They are growing slightly in zigzag. Here you can see some deficiency of iron combined also with nitrogen. And here some leaves with magnesium deficiency. So what we can do, tissue samples at bloom and veraison, or at least choose one date, but do it because only with that is possible to take decisions. Otherwise, without having tissue samples, we are mainly guessing, and we want to be precise of what we want to do and how much we want to apply, especially now that the prices are quite high, and we don't want to harm either the environment. So in terms of production, the yield overall decreased in different areas of the province, not everywhere, but yes, in many places. And what we can see that, as already mentioned by Jeff, last winter frost event damaged bats on 2022 that diminished the viability of bats and of course the production. We have a high disease, fungal disease pressure. So it was possible to see like the diminish of crop due to that in many places. It was quite important. And again, the fungal diseases are quite democratic, just to say something like that, because they affected conventional organics the same way, but it's necessary to be scouting. And again, this might vary between locations and varieties. So main observations for what I saw in different trials through the vineyards in Nova Scotia and in my visits were more numbers of bats after pruning compared to 2021. However, we had that frost damage, so it diminished. When I was counting after bat burst, how many bats were laying down and how many pop up, it varied a lot. So this from areas and varieties. So in some places, I saw only 50 to 56% in the most tender varieties to 98% of bat burst. So that it can explain in some areas why we lost so much crop. Also precipitations at bloom at the beginning, from the middle of June until the beginning of July, we are usually having bloom in the province. And many times we have precipitation this time. So that creates some difficulties for pollination. So that's why you can see some clusters looser than previous years. So that also can explain for pollination, and it's something happening usually in the province. So just preparing before going to the last part. Now it's starting the pruning plan, or even pruning some places, pre-pruning if it's possible. But remember, careful with the soil conditions. If it's too much humidity, it will be very slippery, so it can be danger, and also it can produce some damage to increase the compaction. So be careful, only if it's possible, if you haven't been able. Good idea to compare with previous seasons and set production goals. Okay, so what you want to do, how it's going, and have an idea and a realistic idea. And check varieties and their conditions, because each variety will be different. A very nice tool is what is AFC doing with the bud hardiness reports, so you can see how is the progress. So also it's the opportunity to evaluate the places with more disease pressure. So check a sprayer and a spray strategy from last season, what worked, what didn't work, and how was your year. Fixed trellis system, that it can be not only due to climatic conditions, so if you pass with the tractor, it can happen. And consider the fertilization. Keep in mind what you have done throughout the season and what are you expecting to get. And set the season goals, but set season goals that they are realistic. So in a way that it's achievable, and all your inputs can be solved. Okay, so with this, I want to finish my presentation, and I would like to invite Daniel Graham, Steve Els, and Marcel Kolb for the discussion. And will be mainly very similar to what already discussed and presented. So I know this is a favorite topic from Marcel, and I'd like to know an honest answer. I will start from you because you already laughed. How was the disease pressure and the management the last half of the season?
It definitely was a difficult year in general for growing grapes. We did get caught with some mildew in August. It was pretty severe. We did take some damage from it that we are seeing now that we're pruning. It didn't affect our crop per se, like we didn't lose any crop. We were able to finish the season strong. We didn't get that early frost that most people got in October. So that helped us ripening out most of the fruit. And so we didn't have to drop anything or we didn't lose any on that side. So we finished strong. But the couple of weeks in August definitely took their toll on the vines. It's more the plant health that we're worried about now. And I think we're seeing that across a few vineyards that there is quite some severe damage from that time.
Okay. Steve, how was in your case?
Quite similar. We didn't get caught too bad on downy, but what we found is there was a little period in there where we got caught with powdery, and just that little hotter, drier, humid section there, we did get caught with some powdery mildew. So that was one that we don't usually worry about, but we definitely got caught with it. And like Marcel's saying, we are seeing a little bit of spotting on some of the varieties now that we're pruning through them on the wood. So we know we have to pay a little more attention to that this year. It's potentially going to be a bigger problem with a little bit of it left on the canes. So other than that, very much same. We didn't get the frost in early October. Coming through harvest and everything, we actually find that most of our leaves turn yellow and siest on their own and then dropped off instead of a frost taking them off all at once. So that was great for the plants and great for the fruit. So other than that, yeah, a challenging season. I loved seeing that, that around 1,240 regrowing units. So I always like to see that. I like to see when we're coming into harvest, if we're over 1,100, if we're not like 1,150 thing, I think, okay, we're actually going to be able to get these right. And to see, coming into that end of November, to see those values for last year, 1,248, that's great. I really like seeing that. That means we probably got healthy plants and we probably had good fruit. So challenging season. I know there was quite a bit of downy around here and there. We were lucky with downy, but yeah, we got hit a little bit with powdery.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And Danny, in your case, how you saw the disease pressure? You had too much downy, you saw powdery, you saw something else?
Definitely a challenging season for disease pressure, but I'm, beginning to think that that's just a historical norm for growing in Nova Scotia. Definitely had to pay attention to downy, overwintering fungal pathogens. Powdery mildew I didn't see as much of, except for in acute places like end post vigor and stuff like that. I target for it quite early throughout the season, just in case. Precipitation values quite high, or at least disease pressure presence was quite high, finished strong in the season, but overall aspects of the season definitely very challenging.
Danny, so yeah, it was challenging. I agree with you, it's like the norm. Do you perform any canopy management in specific? Which kind of strategy you use in that sense, and how it can help you to to manage
Yeah,
diseases?
canopy management contingent on cultivar, contingent on wine skew directives, but definitely with vinifera getting in and opening up the canopy quite early post set. Definitely a wonderful thing to do to get as much sunlight into the canopy as possible for reds as well, to minimize relative humidity inside the canopy for vine microclimate.
Marcel, are you doing any also activity canopy management? Do you have any different strategy between hybrids and vinifera, or?
Oh, definitely. So for vinifera, we're trying to get in as early as possible, just to open up the foliage and get them as straight up as possible early on. You know, multiple factors, get some air movement through it, get some light onto the wood and onto the fruit as well, of course. And of course, it's a lot easier to manage disease that way as well, right? So you get a much better effect on any chemicals that you're using, if it's fertilizers or controlling your fungal pressure. Yes, and hybrids are just, you know, you're doing your standard as much as you can, as early as you can. And yeah, we just found it was last year a little bit difficult in trying to get enough coverage out there onto your vines because of those extreme events on rain that just washed everything off, and you just had to redo it. So the timing was a little bit off, we found, to get certain work done on time when it was needed, just because we had to, you know, take more attention to the re-entry times for certain blocks, right? So, but overall, you know, is in general, the earlier you can start, the better you're off throughout the season.
Okay, perfect. Steve, similar to Marcel, you use the same strategies in that way?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I mean, I think most of us are doing it for sure. You're trying to keep the tucking going, right? Making sure that everything's not bunched up too much. Another thing we're really careful with is not to over fertilize. So you end up with this great big thick canopy that, you know, if you get all that extra green material and plus all that extra nitrogen there, it just makes all the diseases develop so much faster and it's harder to control. So really, really careful on over fertilization would be the only thing I could add to, you know, what Danny and Marcel said.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, it's overall, everybody has the practice. The priority will be the vinifera. They are more susceptible, but anyway, if you can do it in the hybrids, is definitely good. As Marcel said, more penetration of fungicide will be better for everyone. Again, don't over fertilize, because first you're damaging the environment. Second, you're overspending money. And third, it's completely unnecessary, increase the cost. So I would like to pass and switch to harvest, because, okay, already we saw the spray application, we know how was the canopy management, but how was harvest? You don't have to tell me the yield, no worries, even though we are between friends, but how was in terms of production, the conditions, if it started earlier than previous season, and if you saw any benefits of that. So I will give the word to Danny this time.
Yeah, fairly successful harvest. I did see some slightly lower numbers in hybrids that had a bumper crop from the previous year. So I did notice that trajectory in terms of harvest was fairly similar to 2021. I did get hit quite hard with early frost on varieties like Cab Franc and stuff like that late season. So definitely had to make some split time decisions in correlation to that. But overall, like a very similar trajectory to 2021 for 2022.
Okay, thank you, Danny.
Yeah.
Steve, how was in your case?
Good. Yeah, we were pretty happy overall with harvest. Started, you know, that late September where kind of traditionally has been starting the last couple of years for sure. Kind of that 3rd or 4th week of September. With hybrids, those are always my favorite ones because Marcel comes and takes them off in a few hours and then we're done with them. You know, with the machine picker. But we actually had a pretty nice stretched out harvest. So we started, I think, on the 23rd of September and we finished October the 21st, which is a really early finish for us for sure. But as far as I know, from everything I've heard and tasted, the wineries were pretty darn happy with our fruit, and we were happy to get them off for a little bit of a recovery time. So yeah, no, it was a good harvest overall. And our targets, we hit our target pretty much dead on for what we were looking for.
Great. Marcel, how was your case?
So yeah, we were actually planning on being a little bit on the cautious side with crop management this year. Then we noticed that we can push our hybrids a little bit more, so we left them hang a little bit more, which which wasn't a good thing. The early stages were good for it. We had to drop it a little bit later, and ended up to be slightly less than the previous year. Same with the vinifera. It ended up to be almost the same.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Depending, again, as we have been presenting, it's depending on locations, varieties, strategies. Everybody can have some variation, and that's good to know. But Marcel, because you finished, how is the wood quality in your opinion for pruning, and how you see the wood at this time?
Well, the wood is a little bit of a different story right now. It definitely leaves me with a lot of concern what's going to happen in spring. We're seeing a lot of spongy wood. Like, it almost seems like it never was actually able to fully ripen out at the end of the season. It seemed like the plants, did shut down very, very late. We had foliage on almost into mid-November, end of November, and plants were still green. And that left us with some concerns, which turned out then to be, especially in the Céval. I've seen some Vidal in other vineyards that are really spongy, that just never had the chance to ripen out. And I think I was talking with Danny about it a little bit earlier on there in December, and early couple of days in January, seeing exactly the same thing. And so currently we're pruning. We're not finished pruning. We're only pre-pruning right now. We're leaving as much wood as we can. We're only taking out what's really not needed, and then evaluate in another couple of weeks. Once we get some colder temperatures, I think that's when we're really going to start seeing what the wood can do for this year. So we're taking it very cautious.
Okay, Danny, I heard your name from Marcel. So
yeah, kind of behaving in a similar facet to Marcel. Definitely my wood hardiness and lignification rates over here in Canning have been very positive. I do see a lot of the same type of parameters that Marcel is talking about in Gaspereau, whether that's, the seasonal affect that we've seen, like a lack of lignification, a sink source issue with the growing season and how warm our temperatures have been. But I am seeing that spongy wood, so I am kind of delaying my considerations for pruning. And I will be going through the vineyards and doing some bud dissections and overall just to see what is happening. But I'm on the cautious side because I want to see what certain blocks, what capacity they have to take relative to the winter that is ahead of us. I would also like to get a better snapshot of things like my fruit to cane ratio, so Rabbez index, and just kind of get a better holistic understanding of how we're going to treat each block. So I didn't even pre-prune in blocks where I had spongy wood for concern of cracking or damage in the court cambium. So I left that, and I'm going to start looking at pruning in mid-February, towards the end of February, March. Yeah.
Stephen, how looks everything in your case?
I'm almost scared to talk. Actually, over here in the North Mountain Bench, we're super happy with our wood. Like, the only concern we have with any of the wood we've seen so far is a little bit of spotting left over from some of the powdery mildew. So other than that, we've pre-pruned everything in the vineyard. We're going through, we've done a couple blocks of Lacadie and a couple blocks of Frontenac now. Really happy with the Lacadie wood, which we usually aren't happy with the Lacadie wood, but this year we are happy with the Lacadie wood. So today we were pruning some Frontenac and little younger plants in the higher density section, and yeah, we're noticing the everything looks like we're putting down a stronger cane this year than we would have last year. So yeah, so far we're actually pretty happy with our wood and our pruning. We'll hold off, like we won't start into the vinifera until late February. It'll take us about that long to roll through the hybrids, but you know, there might be a week pause in there. The great thing about this year is we've been bouncing around the vineyard a little bit and doing all the hybrid blocks that traditionally get buried with snow from it drifting over the hills and stuff. So we've got almost all of the spots that traditionally get buried in with snow before Jeff is forecasting this bunch of snow. So I'm happy about that.
Thank you, Steve. Jeff, would you like to add something?
So the whole issue, we've been seeing this for years and never really understood it. This is what we call cane dieback, and I think it's what other people are calling spongy wood or corky wood. And so it's been a bit of a mystery to us. There's not much in the literature. It's hard to track down. So we've started some experiments, and well, so just observations. I see it by far the strongest in hybrids. So for us, in our part of our bud hardness survey, that's Lackady and Marquette, although I know I do see it in other hybrids as well that I don't see as often. But in every site in the province of Nova Scotia that we go to, we are seeing cane dieback in Lackady and Marquette. But the difference between this year and other years is that we're seeing it start later. And I think everything is a little bit delayed. The physiology of the canes are delayed, and so we're seeing that later. So if you're trying to prune and you're trying to figure out what you should be cutting and what not, if you start your prune at the same time, you may be a little bit disappointed when you go in and see that some of the things that you kept didn't make it. Now, having said that, we've been looking at this quite closely. It seems that things towards the head of the plant are really good. It's always weaker canes. And if you're going to find cane dieback and vinifera, it's always in the weaker canes. But of course, it's not exclusive to the weaker or the smaller canes in hybrids. You can see it in all canes, but it doesn't seem to be that concentrated at the head. So we're hard pressed to find a plant in either our vineyard or anybody else's vineyard where they don't have pruning options. Now, cold weather's coming, that will change things. And we have begun some trials just to look at carbohydrate levels and nutrient levels in the canes that are dying versus the canes that aren't dying, trying to get a handle on what is causing this. Is it really just plants that were over vigorous in the current year and they are limiting carbohydrates? And so if that's the case, that's okay, as long as there's lots of options still left at the head. So far, that's what we're seeing. Need another month of observations before we can say definitively if the situation is worse this year than it has been in other years or not.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeff, for the point of view and the information. It's good to think that in a holistic way and pay attention to all the factors and parameters. So with this last question, we finished the best practice session 5. We oversee all the climatic information, bud hardiness reports that they are available on the website of CGCN and also in the grape blog and the website at Perennia. We saw the summary of the climatic information as well, phenological stages, main observations. We have an interesting and nice discussion with the vineyard managers, growers, and owners of what is happening and the strategies that they use. So, Steve, I give you the word.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks, everyone that participated. I really appreciate Danny and Marcel giving your time. I appreciate Jeff, too, but Jeff's getting paid for doing this, so I'm not going to appreciate him as much. But Danny and Marcel, it's really great to have the discussion with you guys, and for you to give up a little bit of your day to do this for everyone else is fantastic. I think everyone really appreciates it from what I hear. So, and also, Francisco, I don't know if we're going to get another best practices session in with you. I'm going to try to nag you into one more, but we'll see what happens. It has been a fantastic run. I've had a lot of fun and I've learned a lot, and it's been an amazing run doing best practices with you. And I think it'll go down in history as one of our enduring legacies. So thanks very much, Francisco, for creating this webinar series and guiding us along so well. But with that, I'll say adieu and we'll see everyone again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.